And so it's the next lesson already. So that means we're going to talk about modules and require. All right, so when we write a Node.js application, we don't typically write all of our application code in one file. If we were writing all of our application code in app.js, well, that would certainly be a nightmare to manage all the code. And what about other developers to refactor or extend it? So what we want to do is split up our code into logical modules. So we'd have a different module for a different bit of code, which has a particular functionality in our application. And then we call those modules whenever we need them. All right, so as an example, let's say that we have a helper module that contains our helper function, and that helper function tells us the authenticated user. So let's go ahead and create our module, and then call upon that module when we need it. So I'm just going to click here and create a file called helper.js, like that. Now, module is actually a JavaScript file. That's all it is. And then in this file, what I'm going to do is create a variable called helper. And I'm going to set this equal to a function. So this function is going to take user data as an argument. And I'm going to say data as an argument right in here. So now when we call this function, this will return the current user of an application. So I'm going to return a string in here. So I'm going to use backtick because I want to add dynamic data inside this string. All right, so in here, let's say $sign and parentheses. And then inside of it, I'm going to say data, and this will be the username. Then I'm going to say is logged in, like so. Okay, so in here, we will output this text. This user is logged in. All right, so let's go ahead and call this function, see what it looks like. So I'm going to say helper and pass in a string, and this is going to be a name. Let's call the person Alex. And all right, so we've passed an argument, then we've called this function, and we run this file through Node.js, and it's going to return this to us. All right, so let's see it in the console. I'm going to log this function to the console. All right, so let's save it and run this file through Node. So I just say node helper. Now, because this time I want to execute this helper file, just press enter. Okay, so we can see the text. Alex is logged in right here. All right, so yeah, we've made a function which returns to us a string, and it says authenticated user. So what if we want to use this functionality elsewhere in an application, for example, in this app.js? So in that case, we can use the require function, which is on the global object in Node.js to make this module accessible from other files. See how it all falls into place. All right, so let's use the require function in app.js. So inside the app.js file, I'm just going to say require. Then I'm going to pass through a string into these parentheses, and this string is going to be a path to the module that we require in this file. So I'm going to say dot and then / to say that we want a file in the current directory. That's how it gets done. And then I'm going to say the file name, which is helper. And we don't need the JS at the end of this file. It just automatically gives that to the JavaScript file. All right, so we have now required this module inside this file, and now we want to call the helper function in here. So let's cut this console log and paste it in here. All right, so what do you think? Is it going to call that function in here? I'm not going to give you much time to think about it. Hopefully you said no. it's not complete yet, right? It's not going to work because this method is not available to us outside of this module, right? So all this code is not available to us outside the module, even though we've required it. So what we have to do inside this module is explicitly say what part of the module that we want to make available to all the files which require this module. Now, it's actually very easy. The way that we do it is just by saying module.exports. Then we set this to be equal to whatever we want to be made available outside of this module. So in this example, I want the helper function to be made available outside of this module. All right, so let's save all this and try it out. So when we call this module with this require function is going to return to us the exported value of this module. So then what we need to do is set this equal to a variable because it's returning this value. So that means I'm going to create a variable called helper in here, and I'm going to set it to be equal to whatever is returned to us on the module exports property, right, which is this function. So now we can use this helper function in this file because we've required it right here. So we're returning this and storing it in this variable. So this variable is a reference to this function right here. So we can call this function. All right, cool. So let's save it and run the Node app. I'm going to say Node app. All right. We get a string in here. It says Alex is logged in. Perfection, my friends. All right. So that's how we create and require a module in another JavaScript file. So that's enough for now. We'll take a little break here and we'll come back for another wonderful lesson. See you then.